Good evening, everyone. Hi, it's been a while since I've done a Facebook Live, and I just wanted to pop on tonight and talk about Supertasters. And the reason I'm doing that is that Rachel, who owns Little Peeps Eats, contacted me and she said she had a question on her Facebook page about a mum who's talking about her fussy eater who thinks they're a Supertaster and about what to do. And I thought, oh, that's a good point. I haven't talked about it too much. I had a post about it a couple of months ago. So I thought I'd pop in tonight and have a bit of a chat about Supertasters and what they mean and one of the reasons why your child may be fussy with their eating. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Jennifer Cohen. I'm a paediatric dietitian, nutritionist and mum to 2 young boys. And I provide bite-sized pieces of information to busy families out there just like you. So like I said, I'm just going to cover quickly all about Supertasters. So you've probably heard me talk about this before. I've said it in my blog posts that fussy eating is not always behavioural. In fact, probably 90%, maybe 80-90% of the reason that kids are fussy is actually got nothing to do with behaviour. And there's a whole range of reasons. It could be anything from organic reasons, so if they had a tongue tie when they were younger or reflux, to things like food aversions, to sensory issues. And one of the reasons is something called a supertaster. Now, a supertaster you think would sound really, really, really good. But in fact, what it actually can mean is if your child is a supertaster, it can actually mean it could be a reason why they're so fussy. So basically a supertaster is just someone who's got genetically more taste buds. And there is a way of working that out, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. You can just Google it. So, and there's a genetic reason why we're supertasters. So back in the, caveman days, it was in our best interest to be wary of bitter compounds. So basically supertasters is someone who tastes compounds that are really bitter, really, really strong. So back in the caveman days, this was actually a genetic advantage because the supertasters would they'd be able to taste a food that was bitter, and bitter a lot of the time meant poison. So it was a way of, making sure that our species survived. And so this ability to taste the bitter flavours and taste it really strongly is got a genetic component. And so what happens is we pass that genetics on down through the generations. And so when I'm talking to parents about their child being fussy and trying to find out what the reason is, I'll always ask them, is there one of the parents fussy? And sometimes, or a lot of the time, they'll say, yes, dad's fussy or mum was fussy and they're still fussy and they've always been fussy with their food and they'll only eat certain amounts of food. And that gives me a great clue to think, okay, maybe they're a supertaster because that supertasting ability can actually be passed on through your genes. So again, if one of your parents are fussy and you've got a fussy child, then potentially you're both supertasters. And what does a supertaster mean? It just means we taste foods, especially bitter compounds in foods, differently. A bit like how we all, see colours differently or sense smell differently. We all sense taste differently. And supertasters, just someone who sense taste really, really strong. So supertasters tend to dislike really bitter flavours. And of course, the bitter flavoured foods are all those green vegetables. So your broccolis and your cabbage and all those foods that you'd love your kids to eat are the ones that are really, really bitter. It always sucks, doesn't it, that the healthier food is the one that doesn't taste as good to some people. So supertasters a lot of the time react to those bitter compounds in foods. Plus they're also, when they get older, supertasters are ones who, when they drink coffee, they need to have sugar in it or don't like, certain wines, or it took a long time to enjoy wine. I'll get back to the wine in a bit later. So again, it's the bitter compounds of foods. And they actually think that supertasters can sometimes actually be opposed to really, really sweet foods, which I know sounds weird because you always think most fussy eaters will always say yes to sweet foods. But there is some thought that those who are supertasters are also likely to have an aversion to sweet foods. And they're more likely to like salty foods. And that's because salt actually counterbalances the bitter flavour compounds in foods. So supertasters tend to therefore like the more the saltier flavoured foods, and actually sometimes like the more fattier foods. Hey Helen, because of again a bit more of the mouthfeel. But again, the supertasters are someone who are more likely to really dislike those bitter compounds. It's a genetic thing, and it's something that if one parent is fussy, it could be a reason for your kid being fussy. And as I said, it's an evolutionary thing. So what does that mean if you think that your child is fussy? Can the normal rules apply? And a lot of the time we say for behavioural fussy eating is that they will grow out of it, that exposure is really, really important. And for most forms of fussy eating, exposure really is important. Unfortunately for those super tasters out there, that alone is not going to get them eating better. They actually did a study. Now, this is only one study, and I am a researcher, so one study does not prove anything, but it was an interesting study out of the UK where they looked at exposure in kids. I think they gave them kale and they rated how they liked it, and then they gave some kids raisins and some kids kale, and they talked about exposure. And the kids who were constantly exposed to this kale over a certain time period, their enjoyment or their like of kale increased. Helen here is saying still on carrots and red pepper after about 2.5 years. Now I know Helen, and I suspect her son is a super taster. And Helen, I will get to the red pepper and carrots in a second actually, and you'll understand why your child probably only likes those foods. So getting back to the kale studies, so most kids who was exposed to the kale over a certain period of time they ranked kale as starting to like it. The only group of kids who still hated kale as much as they hated it at the beginning were those who were super tasters. So they actually looked at they did tests for taste, and those who were super tasters still didn't like the kale even after being exposed to it. So I know a few of you parents out there are going, oh, this is really bad news. Why are you telling me this? It's a Wednesday night. Origin is about to be on. I do not want to hear this. And I guess I just wanted to let you guys know that doesn't mean that you can't do anything about it, but it's good to be aware if you think your child is a super taster, because it also shows you that just providing the food is not going to be enough to get them to start liking the foods. So what can you do about it? Unfortunately, we still don't know 100% prove what is it, this, if you do this thing, they will start liking the foods. I guess my first one is to make sure that if you think your child is a super taster, that you don't push or force them to try the food. Now this goes for all kids, but very much for super tasters, because again, it doesn't matter how much you force them or want them to eat it or expose it, they're not likely to want to eat it. And what you don't want to do is to get them scared of that food by forcing them to have it over time. Because if it tastes really horrible to them and they keep having it, they're just going to hate it more and more, and they're never going to want to eat it as they get older. So number one is, if you think they're a super taster, please don't force the food, because we don't want to cause worse food aversions. So number two is, in the case of super tasters, it's actually probably a good idea to try and mask the flavour of the bitter compounds and counterbalance them. So one of the best ways to do that is salt. Problem is we don't actually want our kids having too much salt, but it is something you could use in small amounts to try and counterbalance the bitter taste. And they actually did studies of super tasters and found they actually don't eat more salt than the regular non-super tasters. But again, it's something that you can use. But even things like adding sort of, cheesy sauces to vegetables, or different herbs and spices, or butter, or even your good old honey. Again, I know you're all like, oh my God, it's a pediatric dietitian. She's saying adding sweet things to vegetables. But in the case of a super taster, having to mask those bitter compounds is something that you will have to do, because they're just never going to like it. And what you want to do is make exposure to these foods as positive as possible. So masking those flavors with herbs and spices, with salt, with honey, those kind of things, and cheese sauces and dressings might actually over time help them to accept those foods. So then the other one is if you're trying to get your kids to have vegetables, your natural tendency is to eat the green vegetables, because we all want the green vegetables, and I don't need to tell you how good they are for us. But the green vegetables and some of those bitter, cruciferous vegetables, they're the worst as far as the bitter compounds. So starting with trying to get your kids to have the more sweeter foods, so things like carrots and pumpkin and sweet potato and eggplant. And Helen, who's on here, said, her son only eats carrots and red pepper after 2.5 years. And he probably likes those because they're a sweeter tasting vegetable, as opposed to something like broccoli or beans or something which are bitter compounds. So again, work on exposing your child to the more sweeter vegetables first, and working on masking those more bitter compounds later on when there's sort of some trust involved. And I guess the question is will they grow out of it? And so the answer is there's going to be a lot of factors involved, and some people won't. But again, if they've been exposed to being forced to eat these foods as a kid, they're going to get food aversions and they'll never eat that food. But over time, they actually might learn to sort of accept the foods or find ways to master the foods. So again, still expose your kids to it. Try some of those tips that I said, and just over time, they'll hopefully, over time. But again, it could be down the track. It could be until they're 15, 20, 25 years. A girl that I work with, she knows she's a super taster. She's done it recently, and her daughter is as well. And sort of over the last 10, she's become a much better eater. And it's not that she, absolutely loves salad and vegetables, but she's just learnt to tolerate it. And it probably helps that she wasn't forced to eat it as a child. So again, it's something that they're just going to have to, they will just sort of work up to. And really, all of us actually adapt and get better, or our flavour perception changes as we get older. I'm sure there was plenty of you who didn't like red wine when you were, in your early 20s. I know I didn't. And then as I got older, I learnt to appreciate it. And that's the same with coffee without sugar. And again, I'm not a super taster, but again, the concept is still the same. So again, I've got the texture thing. Here we go. So I've got Helen making comments. She said, what might work next? Doesn't like the texture of corn. Again, unfortunately, Helen, your child, and I do know, but I'm not going to say too much, could also be, and we haven't talked about this before, actually could have some sensory issues as well, and that's where the texture thing comes in as well. So if you've got the double whammy of a super taster and someone who's got sensory issues, then it is going to be that double whammy, and all it is again trying to find different ways to serve the food, and just constantly giving it, and then just accepting if he's not going to take it. And as Helen said, his dad was 30 before he ate vegetables. And again, I know the dad we're talking about, and again, it's just something that that is going to take time. And so it's not that we accept it and give up, and you can still definitely give them those foods, but making sure that when you give them those foods, it's always done in a stress-free environment, and accepting if they don't eat it. And that's probably the most important thing you can do. Keep up those more sweeter vegetables that they do like. If you're worried, if you're really worried, starting a multivitamin to get those nutrients in there missing out of. And that's really the advice I have for today. So like I said, super tasters are just one piece of the fussy eating puzzle, but it really is a very important one. And I'll keep looking out for any new evidence that comes through for you guys, showing any studies that can, help super tasters to eat better. And there's a lot more research coming out. There's actually a researcher at UNSW that's really interested in this area. So if I ever hear anything about super tasters and what we can do to help your children, then I definitely will. So I hope this has been helpful. Please feel free to share this with any of your friends who you think are super tasters. And let me know if any of this resonates with you. I'm hoping to do a bit more regular Facebook Lives, at least once a week, either on a Wednesday, Thursday night. So if there's any topics that you want me to cover, send me a message right below, and I'm happy to have a chat. Helen, love it. Thanks, Dr. Jen. And we can also talk off screen as well. So have a great night. For those in Sydney and Queensland, go the Blues. And I will see you guys soon. Okay, have a good night. Bye.